There's a certain type of person who looks for the exit as soon as they walk in, has zero expectations of their boss, and remains unfazed even if the world were to end. While the whole world is buzzing about the baby boomers, Millennials, and Gen Z, they are the invisible generation caught in the middle. Generation X, 1965 to 1980. They are the coworkers who silently fix the catastrophic server error without sending a company-wide email about it. They are the parents who love you fiercely, but occasionally seem emotionally locked behind an impenetrable pane of glass. They are the generation that literally built the modern internet, yet they actively refuse to post a video of their breakfast. And here is what nobody ever tells you about them. Their psychology is undeniably the most complex and deeply misunderstood of any living generation. To understand why your Gen X friend or parent operates the way they do, you have to understand the specific psychological crucible that forged them. They were the original, mass-scale Latchkey kids. Picture this. The year is 1982. You are 9 years old. You get off the yellow school bus and walk 3 blocks to your house. There is no Life 360 app tracking your location. There is no Ring camera pinging your mother, smartwatch to confirm you made it to the porch. You reach into your pocket, pull out a heavy, brass key, and turn the deadbolt on an entirely empty house. You walk inside. The only sound is the hum of the refrigerator. You pour yourself a glass of tap water, sit on the linoleum floor, and you just wait. For hours. Every single day. 7 million. A landmark study published in the American Journal of Orthopsychiatry found that by 1984, approximately 7 million children between the ages of 5 and 13 were entirely unsupervised after school. That is not just a cultural footnote. That is an entire generation whose developing brains were quietly learning that you simply cannot count on an adult to be in the room when things go wrong. That empty house did a lot more than just teach them how to make a microwave dinner. It fundamentally rewired their neurology. It drilled in the unshakable idea that your actions have very real, immediate consequences, and there is no authority figure around to buffer the impact. Psychologists call this a high-contingency environment. A high-contingency environment is a situation where an action and its outcome are directly, inescapably linked, with zero buffer time and zero mediation. If you forgot to take the chicken out of the freezer, you didn't have dinner. If you left your bike in the driveway and it got stolen, you just didn't have a bike anymore. Nobody cared about your feelings regarding the stolen bike. Your brain learned to predict consequences in real time, mapping out the future to avoid disaster. This is exactly why Gen X tends to think 3 steps ahead in ways that completely baffle younger generations. They never had a buffer. They were their own buffer. And the lessons didn't stop at the front door. Gen X grew up watching the adults in their lives talk a very big game about stability, only to turn around and completely shatter it. Through the late 70s and 80s, they watched divorce rates skyrocket to unprecedented highs. They watched their parents give their literal blood, sweat, and tears to corporate conglomerates, only to get handed a pink slip on a Friday afternoon when the company decided to restructure. Every cultural message told them that if you played by the rules, you would be safe. But then the rules just changed right in front of them, over and over again. Cognitive researchers have a term for how the brain adapts to this kind of prolonged unreliability. They call it defensive pessimism. Defensive pessimism is a cognitive strategy where you deliberately lower your expectations and mentally prepare for the worst possible outcome to manage your own anxiety. Gen X doesn't call it defensive pessimism. They just call it being realistic. It is not that they are deeply cynical, though they definitely use cynicism as a tool. It is more like they built up this incredibly thick emotional armor. They might cross their fingers for good things to happen, but deep down in their nervous system, They fully expect the rug to be pulled out from under them. Because honestly, during their formative years, the rug was always getting pulled. This deep-seated skepticism explains their entirely unique relationship with social media and visibility. Today, we are told that to be successful, you must be visible. You must build a personal brand. But Gen X grew up in an era where privacy wasn't a luxury. It was the default setting of human existence. When you messed up as a kid in 1986, maybe 3 kids in the cul-de-sac knew about it. There were no smartphones. There were no viral humiliations. Just a few awkward memories fading away in a suburban basement. To a Gen X brain, the modern idea of blasting your private life out for strangers to consume doesn't feel like an opportunity. It feels like a massive security threat. They learned very early on that the less people know about you, the less ammunition they have against you. Being invisible isn't a failure to them. It is a tactical advantage. But we have to talk about the cost of this advantage, because there is a dark side to this generation's psychology, and it rarely gets addressed. Gen X struggles deeply with what researchers identify as patterns of self-reliance that border on clinical anxiety. They are so remarkably capable at handling crisis situations that people assume they are fine. But that capability is often born from a terrifying unwillingness to depend on another human being. Research published in the Journal of Adult Development consistently shows that Gen Xers report significantly lower levels of seeking social support during highly stressful periods. It is not because they don't have friends. It is not because they lack a community. It is because, to the Latchkey kid, asking for help physically feels like admitting defeat. It feels like a vulnerability that will eventually be punished. They will silently drown under a mountain of stress before they ever raise their hand and ask you for a life preserver. But this brings us to the most incredible part of their psychological makeup, because out of this intense isolation, they developed an approach to the world that is actually profound. Look at how they process information. Before the internet, knowledge had a physical weight. If you wanted to know something in 1988, you could just pull a piece of glass from your pocket and ask an algorithm. You had to go to a library. You had to spend 2 hours hunting through wooden card catalog drawers, tracking down a specific Dewey Decimal number, and walking through silent aisles to find a single book that might hold the answer. Information had a physical cost. It required friction, effort, and time. Cognitive psychologists refer to this process as deeper encoding. When information requires significant effort to obtain, your brain assigns it higher value, integrating it more permanently into your memory. You didn't just consume information, you earned it. This translated directly into how they interact with the physical world. If the TV picture rolled, you didn't call a repairman. You smacked the side of the box and adjusted the UHF dial until it stopped. If your bike chain slipped off the gears, you flipped the whole thing upside down, got black grease all over your fingers, and figured out how the mechanism worked. They developed a mechanical intuition about life. They genuinely believe that with enough patience, a little quiet focus, and maybe a screwdriver, you can master your environment. And you see this in the workplace today. It is a weird paradox. Gen X is simultaneously the most fiercely independent generation in the workforce, and yet the most quietly collaborative. They will never ask you for help. They have been figuring things out on their own since they were 8 years old. But if you are in trouble, if the project is falling apart, they will show up, fix it without drama, and leave without asking for a single drop of credit. Their relationship with authority perfectly mirrors this. They have absolutely zero patience for titles. If you are a middle manager with a fancy degree, but you don't actually know how to do the job, they will see right through you, and they will not respect you. They grew up watching incompetent authority figures make terrible decisions. From the televised Watergate hearings, to the Iran-Contra affair, to the absolute mishandling of the Challenger explosion. They learned that adults in suits do not inherently know what they are doing. But if you are competent, if you have earned your position through actual, undeniable skill, a Gen X worker will follow you into a burning building. They are fiercely loyal to competence, even if they possess zero loyalty to the corporation itself. They have been economically traumatized time and time again. The youngest Gen Xers graduated college, right as the .com bubble completely burst in 2000. The older ones were finally buying homes and hitting their stride when the 2008 financial crisis decimated the economy. They learned to build multiple streams of income and keep a side hustle going. Not because they are inherently entrepreneurial girl bosses or hustle bros, but because their defensive pessimism reminds them that the floor could drop out tomorrow morning. And now they are parents. They are watching their own children grow up in a hyper-connected, hyper-supervised world. They give their kids the constant attention, the deep emotional validation, and the presence that they themselves never experienced. But late at night, in the quiet moments, they worry. They worry they have made their kids too soft. They worry that by removing the high-contingency environment, they've removed the exact friction that builds resilience. Because in the Gen X worldview, if you don't know how to survive alone in an empty house, you aren't really safe. Generation X might honestly be the very last generation of humans who truly understand what it means to be entirely alone with your own thoughts. They know how to be profoundly bored without panicking. They know how to solve a complex problem without immediately crowdsourcing the solution on Google. They are not inherently better than millennials or boomers. They were just shaped by a highly specific, fleeting moment in human history. A moment when the old analog world was rapidly dying, and the new, hyper-digital world hadn't quite been born yet. They are the bridge generation. And the thing about bridges is that they don't get much attention. Nobody stops to applaud the concrete and steel that lets them cross safely to the other side. The bridge is just there, doing the heavy lifting, taking the weight of the past and the future all at once, holding things together, and expecting absolutely nothing in return. And maybe that is the most deeply Gen X thing of all. Not caring if anyone notices. If this hit home for you, or if it perfectly describes someone you love, please consider subscribing. I would genuinely appreciate your support.